When taking a look at photosynthesis, it can be broken down into two reactions, the light-dependent reaction and the Calvin cycle. So, taking a look at the equation of our photosynthesis right here, what is used in our light reaction is going to be water. So, water, and what's going to be produced is oxygen. In terms of our Calvin cycle, the light-independent reaction, we're going to be taking in carbon dioxide to make glucose. In this video, we're going to be focusing exclusively on the light reaction. So, the light reaction. Water is used, so water here is used as a source of electrons, and we can use that to store energy in the form of ATP and NADPH. The good thing is that we produce oxygen as a byproduct, which is important for breathing. Again, we're going to be taking a deeper look into our light-dependent reaction, and in order to do this, we need to zoom in to a thylakoid's membrane. So, let's do that. So, if we zoom in closer into our thylakoid membrane, it's going to look something like this. At a first glance, it can be very intimidating looking. It can look like a very complex diagram with all these different proteins and molecules. However, the idea is very simple. Energy from our light photons are going to excite our electrons. So, as you'll see in photosystem 2 here, for instance, the energy is going to excite our electrons. And again, the idea is that those excited electrons in a high energy state will now be transferred from one molecule to another. They're going to go from a high energy state to a now low energy state when they're transferred from, again, one molecule to another, which is used to kind of fuel and create a proton gradient within the lumen, as you'll see right here. Again, so as we see in this diagram, our hydrogen ions are being facilitated and aided by this electron transferring, right? So again, this is going to be called the electron transport chain. So I'm going to abbreviate it as ETC. And again, once we are moving these electrons from one energy state to another, one molecule to another, from a high energy state to a low energy state, that energy is used to create this proton gradient within the lumen. So pretend this is the lumen. So this is going to be the lumen, and this is going to be the stroma. Another thing is, with the electron transport chain, is that we'll actually generate, so this process of our photosystem 2 exciting our electron using the photons of light, then undergoing this electron transport chain creates ATP as a byproduct almost. So energy is used from our lost electrons to actually create ATP and once again create this highly concentrated proton gradient within the lumen. So you may be asking, what is the purpose of creating a proton gradient? The purpose is to help us create ATP in the end, which you'll see if we fast forward a little bit. This is done via ATP synthase. In order to maintain our concentration gradient, hydrogen is going to naturally want to diffuse out, because by this point, we're going to have a bunch of hydrogen ions that are pumped in via this protein pump here from our first step, or our second step of the electron transport chain, and we're going to have a highly concentrated lumen. And at a certain point, right, it's going to eventually reach equilibrium. And that's not good. That's not what we want. We want to maintain that lower concentration within our lumen than in the stroma. So in order to get it out, we need to use a protein called ATP synthase. And since hydrogen ions are charged, they're charged particles, they can't just go through this phospholipid bilayer like a lipid would be able to do normally. So through a process of facilitated diffusion, we're also able to power ATP synthase. And actually, what that does is it creates ATP from ADP. So this would be ADP over here. and we are going to create ATP. ATP. So, as hydrogen ions diffuse across from, again, a high to low concentration, it facilitates and essentially turns that motor over here, which can be used to jam on that phosphate group, to our ADP, to in the end create ATP for our Calvin cycle, the energy that we want. Additionally, our electrons from a higher state that are going from a higher state to a lower state isn't the only thing that contributes to the hydrogen ion concentration within the lumen. So during the first stage, the very, very first stage of our process, we have something called photolysis. So photolysis, what happens during photolysis is essentially, if you break down the root word, photo means light, and lysis means to break down. So we're using light to essentially split/break down a water molecule, and that is what the whole thing the whole process of photolysis is. Essentially, what you're doing is you're breaking down water, and you're turning it into usable electrons for our photosystem 2. Because you're probably wondering, where does the electrons come from? This is where the electrons come from. Our first step of photolysis. So water is going to break down into 2 electrons, 2 protons, or 2 hydrogen ions, and 1/2 of an oxygen. And this is where our oxygen comes in. This is going to be our source of oxygen. Where we get oxygen from is from this process of photolysis. So this is going to be sent out. And what we have left is 2 electrons and 2 protons. As I mentioned earlier, this actually helps contribute to our hydrogen ion concentration within the lumen. As you'll see here, we have a hydrogen ion concentration. And again, it's all about maintaining this hydrogen ion concentration so we can actually create usable forms of energy. So far, we've discussed where ATP and oxygen comes from. However, we have not discussed this little thing up here, NADP plus and creating NADPH. So where does NADPH come from? Well, this process first started in photosystem 2. So what is a photosystem? It's important that we take a look at this first. Photosystems are combinations of proteins which can contain chlorophyll and pigment, molecules that are very responsive to light. So these, again, light comes in, and that explains why. They have chlorophyll within them that are used to create energy, which excite our electrons. And this is very important in creating energy, right? Our electrons will eventually make its way to our photosystem 1 from photosystem 2, as you'll see here. And you'll have something very similar that happens within our first photosystem compared to our photosystem 2, right? You have our electron that is, again, getting excited via light. So again, light is helping energize our electrons, right? And what's going to happen next is, again, we're going to go through this electron transport chain. So again, electron transport chain. And essentially what's going to happen is, as we're moving from one molecule to another, that can be actually used to fuel and provide energy to reduce NADPH or NADP plus into NADPH. NADPH is essential in our light independent cycle, also known as the Calvin cycle. So keyword here being reduce. Remember, when we are to reduce, that means to gain an electron. But also remember that when we reduce a molecule, it tends to have more energy, which is why we want NADPH. Photosystem 1 also uses that energy from our electron transport chain to create our hydrogen ion gradient within our lumen. So again, just a quick overview here. All the light-dependent reaction is about is taking in that energy from light, exciting electrons, and creating energy through this thing called the electron transport chain. Again, we're going from high energy states to low energy states to fuel and create energy here, and also create a hydrogen gradient within our lumen. Okay, just a quick overview here. Light will come in to photosystem 2, which starts our process. So light is going to come in from photosystem 2. It's going to use our electron, which we got from our process of photolysis. Remember? Photolysis, where we broke down our water to give us usable electrons. What's going to happen is the electrons from water will get excited and, again, go from lower energy states, or a high energy state, to a lower energy state. And as it's doing so, the energy that is used and lost during this process is used to facilitate the pumping of hydrogen ions and create that hydrogen ion gradient within our lumen. Because again, we want to create our hydrogen ion gradient within the lumen. One more thing. Again, the energy from our electron transport chain also provides us enough energy to create ATP from ADP. So essentially, I know the step is missing here, but ADP plus PI into our, or I'll draw this like nice little thing here, into ATP. So our first electron transport chain is going to do two things: create the hydrogen ion gradient and create ATP. And in photosystem 1, what's happening is essentially we're going to grab that electron from our first photosystem. Again, it's being passed down. Since it's in a lower energy state, again, we're going to energize it once more. And what's going to happen is that the same thing is going to happen again. So we're going to go from a higher energy state, which is excited, to a lower energy state. And this is going to provide our energy for reducing and sort of fuel the reduction of NADP plus to NADPH, which we're going to need in our Calvin cycle. This also, again, is going to create a hydrogen ion concentration. I know they don't put it here, but it creates a hydrogen ion concentration within our lumen. And by this point, we have built up a bunch of hydrogen ions within our lumen. We've undergone both electron transport chains. So now it's a matter of the final process called chemiosmosis. What happens in chemiosmosis is we're going to use our hydrogen ion concentration, since now our hydrogen ion concentration within our lumen is going to be greater than in the stroma. So what's going to want to happen naturally is hydrogen ions are going to want to diffuse from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. We know this because nature wants to do this. However, since these hydrogen ions are actually charged, they can't just, again, go through our phospholipid bilayer normally. So we have to actually have a protein, and we have ATP synthase, which actually allows us to do this. Because again, as hydrogen ions pass through, this also fuels our production of ATP from our adenosine diphosphate. So again, we're going to be creating ATP as we diffuse our hydrogen ion concentration. So the whole idea is we're using hydrogen ion concentration to fuel ATP synthase and create ATP. Again, this is called chemiosmosis, and in doing all of this, we create molecular breathable oxygen. Alright, now we're going to do some practice problems on what we've just learned. Number 10 asks us, the pigment molecules of a chloroplast are located where? So, pigment molecules, remember we discussed this, photosystems typically have the chlorophyll within them, which help us excite our electrons. Where does this all happen? Within our thylakoid membrane. So A is going to be our answer, because again, we have the thylakoid membrane, which contains our photosystems. Our thylakoid space wouldn't make sense either, because our thylakoid space is the stroma. The stroma acts as having a low concentration of hydrogen ions within our light system, or light-dependent reaction, and that's purely the use of it. Within its inner membrane is going to be wrong as well, and within the space should not be right. So the only one that makes sense here is going to be A, within the thylakoid membrane. Number 11 reads that a source of protons for the proton gradient within a chloroplast is which of the following? So, remember doing our first step of photolysis, what actually happened was we broke down water using light, and we produced hydrogen ions, 2 electrons, and 1/2 of an oxygen. So we produced oxygen. However, that's not what we're looking at here. We're looking at the proton gradient. Proton gradient is the hydrogen gradient. This process provides us with additional hydrogen ions, as we mentioned earlier. So this also helps us create that proton gradient within our chloroplast. So a source of protons here is going to be water. As through the process of photolysis, we break down water and actually get the protons that are used in creating that gradient within our lumen. Number 12 reads that in photosynthesis, energy for attaching ADP or phosphate to ADP in our photosystem comes directly from what? So remember that photosystem 2 creates ATP, or photosystem 2 uses electrons or energized electrons in our electron transport chain to create ATP. So energy for attaching this comes from our which of the following? So oxidation of glucose is not going to be true. Reduction of glucose is not going to be true either, because that doesn't happen within our light-dependent reaction. Photosystem 2 references our light-dependent reaction, and none of these first two options happen within the light-dependent reaction. So letter C and D. So C reads a proton gradient, which powers our energy for attaching phosphate to ADP, and the formation of NADPH. So the formation of NADPH happens in our electron transport chain later in photosystem 1. However, we're taking a look at photosystem 2 right now. So the formation of NADPH doesn't act as energy for this to happen. It's energy for our Calvin cycle, so that's going to be wrong. Our only answer is a proton gradient. And remember, we mentioned this, right? As we create that excited electron, the electron is excited, it goes from one molecule to another, losing energy. The energy is then used to, again, create ATP. So create ATP from ADP. And this should be all familiar since we talked about this. So the answer is going to be a proton gradient. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video helped. This is me trying a bit of a new thing. I haven't done a bio video at all. This is a math channel after all, but I do want to try, to do new stuff, as I did change my handle to STEM with Matt. So take a look at that. But yeah, I'm trying to do other science stuff as well. Not just math, not just one thing, right? I want to try other sciences and just try to test the waters, I guess. Feedback is nice. I like reading comments. I always reply. I always do that. So if this video helped, just let me know and leave a like, I guess. So with that being said, I'll see you guys all later.